Wisconsin has just issued a strongly worded statement condemning Xavier Lucas and condemning the University of Miami. Here's what they conveniently left out and what they may have gotten wrong.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Sunday. I'm Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC, and writer for Canes County at Rivals. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We're going to talk on this episode about that, not only the statement that Wisconsin made, which is very strongly worded against Miami and against Xavier Lucas, follow-up statement by the Big Ten, which backs up their member institution, whether or not legal action is going to come out of this or if it ends with the statements. But let's talk about the statement itself. The quick background. So Xavier Lucas just played his true freshman season at Wisconsin and played very well. This is a former South Florida standout, American Heritage Plantation, one of the top high school programs in the country down in South Florida. And after one season, very good season with Wisconsin, Lucas eventually came to the decision that he wanted to leave his situation up there and come play closer to home. And he had requested more than a month ago to enter the transfer portal. And despite the fact that Wisconsin was and is required by NCAA rules to enter that player into the transfer portal within 48 hours after that request, they refused to do so. And they admitted in their statement to breaking that NCAA rule. They felt like they had a good reason to do it. And so since Wisconsin never entered Xavier Lucas into the transfer portal, he was either just kind of going to be stuck there trying to wade through the legal red tape, or what ended up happening was he and his lawyer, Darren Heitner, who, by the way, Darren's going to be joining us here on Locked On Canes this week, so stay tuned for that. But they found a loophole, and the NCAA had to admit that they don't have any rule against this, that they were able to withdraw Xavier academically from Wisconsin before their deadline, before the spring semester. They were able to withdraw him academically and enroll him academically at Miami before Miami's deadline to enroll. And they were able to skirt around the transfer portal rules and do so, we feel, legally. Okay. But Wisconsin was not just going to take that lying down. So here is the statement, and it's, there's a lot of powerful language in this. Let's talk about the statement that Wisconsin released, what I feel is wrong with it, and what they left out of it. Because, of course, this only gives Wisconsin's side of the story. No respect to whatever Lucas's side is, or certainly no respect to what Miami's side of the story is. So Wisconsin starts with their statement. We are disappointed that Xavier Lucas has chosen to withdraw from the University of Wisconsin. He's been a valued member of our football program, and we were looking forward to helping him continue to grow as a student, a person, and a football player. So, of course, they're sorry to lose him because he's a great football player, and I also understand he's a really good student, right? But not to mention, they really didn't want him to leave. They're going to say a bunch of nice things about him in that first paragraph before they say some not nice things about him in the latter part. So here's where it gets juicier. This is part of the Wisconsin official statement that came out on Saturday. They say on December 2nd, 2024, Xavier and Wisconsin Athletics entered into a binding 2-year NIL agreement reflecting his strong commitment to continuing with the Wisconsin football program. Here's a problem with that. So the alleged binding agreement that Wisconsin is talking about, and this was a document that I believe was created by the Big Ten that their member institutions are having players sign, which is essentially their attempt at a 2-year non-compete and a transfer portal proof agreement. But here's the issue with it. This NIL agreement is based on a revenue sharing model that hasn't passed yet. So this would be the result of the impending House versus NCAA settlement, which is expected to pass, not guaranteed to pass, by the way, but is expected to pass in April. So that revenue sharing model is not in effect yet. And yet Wisconsin and apparently other universities within the Big Ten are having players sign these documents to essentially sign their rights exclusively to Wisconsin and whatever other school 3 months before the House settlement even passes. So they call it a binding agreement. From where I sit, it doesn't seem like a binding contract because, again, this is based on a hypothetical thing that hasn't happened yet. This sounds more like an MOU, or Memorandum of Understanding, which is defined as a formal agreement between two or more parties that is not legally binding. MOUs are often used to establish the ground rules for a partnership or to document the expectations of each party. So this is the thing. If Wisconsin did decide to pursue legal action here to enforce that, what they call a binding contract, what I would call an MOU or an agreement, I don't know if that one would pass the smell test legally, but they're trying to hold him to an agreement based on a revenue sharing model that hasn't officially come into effect yet. I think that's the first problem with this. Wisconsin continues, they say, we understand that he also executed a separate agreement with the Varsity Collective. Now, that is the NIL collective. And by the way, NIL collectives are not officially affiliated with schools or the athletic department. So, they're basically trying to make Xavier Lucas look bad, saying, hey, he signed this other agreement with a third party where he's presumably getting paid. And how terrible does it look for him to walk away from that? Wisconsin athletics have no power over that. They are not affiliated officially with the collective, so they cannot hold him from entering the transfer portal based on something he signed with a third party. So they just kind of threw that one in there. And honestly, throwing that in there might have been a mistake because, again, the NIL collective is not part of the athletic department. So I think they just threw that in there to make him look bad. They continue. His agreement with Wisconsin athletics included substantial financial compensation for Xavier. Under the terms of the agreement between Xavier and Wisconsin athletics, it remains in effect and enforceable. So that's going back to the agreement on the revenue sharing, which, again, revenue sharing hasn't passed yet. And also the language in there, it's a little tricky. Is Wisconsin admitting they have already paid him based on a revenue sharing agreement for something that hasn't passed yet? Or are they just saying, hey, he would have made substantial compensation? Because if they're saying they already paid him money for that, I don't think that's legal to pay him revenue sharing when revenue sharing has not come into effect yet. So they may or may not have admitted themselves to committing a violation there. So they continue. Badger student athletes who have signed these agreements expect Wisconsin athletics to honor the terms. In turn, Wisconsin athletics relies on the student athlete representations in signing these agreements that they will do the same. All right. So, they're saying, hey, if you want this agreement to have any value, it's our moral obligation to live up to it. And it's your moral obligation to live up to your side. That's usually you go into an agreement with that understanding. Now, when Wisconsin hired Luke Fickle away from Cincinnati when he was under contract there with the Cincinnati Bearcats, did he act in that good faith when he did that? When Wisconsin, when they signed Tanner Mordecai a couple of years ago, maybe there was a little tampering that went there when he was at SMU. We'll get to that. So they continue. A request to enter the transfer portal after entering into such an agreement is inconsistent with the representations and mutual understanding of the agreement, and explains the reason for not processing a transfer portal request under these circumstances. Now, this would be problematic if Wisconsin tried to take legal action here, because, again, my understanding, I could be wrong, I'm not perfect, and I'm not a lawyer, but my understanding of the NCAA rules is no matter what you feel the circumstances are, you are required to enter a player's name into the transfer portal within 48 hours of them making the request. If you have issues with it, you can pursue legal action outside of that. Instead, Wisconsin seemingly admittedly broke NCAA rules by not putting him into the portal. They continue. Under the transfer provision used by Xavier this past week, any contact between a student athlete enrolled at one institution and the football program to which they are transferring is prohibited by NCAA rules, they say. They continue. This is probably the strongest shot that they took here. We have credible information indicating impermissible contact between Xavier and University of Miami football program personnel prior to Xavier's request to enter the transfer portal. Direct interference with another institution's committed player and contractual interest is prohibited by NCAA tampering rules and the law. Okay, so they say they have credible information. Do they have credible evidence? Because those are not necessarily the same things there. And listen, I obviously I don't know what they have or what they think that they have that would prove some kind of tampering, because with the way and we all know that tampering or alleged tampering happens everywhere, right? I mean, Miami lost a receiver to Alabama recently, Isaiah Horton, who was getting crystal balls to land at Alabama before he was even in the transfer portal. Like this stuff does happen, but usually, folks, the way that this happens is intermediaries, people who are not directly affiliated with athletic departments, will communicate, they'll put out feelers, and doing it that way, it's typically you're not illegally tampering when things happen that way. So I would love to know. And if Wisconsin, I don't know if they're just trying to bark being bigger than the bite here, if they really feel like they have something, but unless they were maybe recording the electronic communication somehow, if they were tapping Xavier Lucas's phone, or if he may have, shown somebody something that was impermissible. I don't know what they actually have here, because there are obviously a lot of ways to work around the tampering, as I would imagine Wisconsin probably did when they took Tanner Mordecai away from SMU a few years ago. So I would be curious as to what they actually have, because from the Lucas side of it, his lawyer, Darren Heitner, who again is expected to join us here soon on Locked On Canes, mentioned that when this operation was going on, finding this loophole to get Lucas from Wisconsin to Miami, they had to do it in a way where they were not communicating with the athletic department. And, he applied academically to the University of Miami and was able to register for classes, but that they had to do this independently of the athletic department. That is the claim from the other side. And again, this is the sort of stuff that Wisconsin will put this out in their statement without mentioning the other side of it, because they're giving you your side of the story. They continue. This is another significant moment in the evolution of college athletics as we move toward a future state that will rely on direct contracting with student athletes. Enforcing the parties' adherence to contract obligations and addressing improper interference by other institutions must be a priority, they say. The system cannot work without an operational model that both establishes and enforces agreed upon rules and regulations and contractual terms that are binding on both institutions and student athletes. They say we continue to review facts as they unfold in this matter and will evaluate all operations going forward to determine the appropriate course of action. On the other side, I'll tell you why the NCAA might be very hesitant to back up Wisconsin and the Big Ten on this matter. And we'll talk about another. I've had Wisconsin fans they don't like me very much right now. I get it. They've brought up to me a fear that they have about the precedent this sets. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on this brand new episode of Locked On Canes. Guys, the best thing that ever happened to football season and the playoffs is Prize Picks. I've been playing Prize Picks since 2021. Prize Picks is the place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions in winnings, Prize Picks has changed the game in daily fantasy sports. Whether it's the playoffs or regular season, Prize Picks has made it easier than ever to win big while enjoying all the football. Now it's playoff time, and there's no better way to get in on the action than with Prize Picks. Here's how it works. You simply select you pick more or less on at least two players, their stat projections. You can make 2 to 6 selections. If your picks hit, you could win up to 1,000 times your cash. That's right, 1,000 times your money just by making a few simple picks. Guys, it takes me less than 60 seconds to make my projections. I love all the different options: receiving yards, rushing yards, touchdowns. Plus, with Prize Picks Flex Play, you can still double your money even if one of your picks doesn't hit. And with the app, you get your winnings fast, sometimes in as little as 15 minutes. Ready to run your game this football season? Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's right, $50 just for playing. Don't wait. Take your game to the next level with Prize Picks. Run your game. And the best partner to Prize Picks this weekend and every weekend is FanDuel. Guys, this is the spot to get all the action. From the first whistle and the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first bet. That's $300 to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Whether you're betting on your favorite team or just looking to add some extra excitement to the playoffs, FanDuel has you covered. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make the playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Thank you so much for making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. For your next listen, make sure you check out Locked On ACC. Kenton Gibbs and I take you through all the big stories in the conference. I'm sure we'll be talking about this Xavier Lucas thing. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're available free on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So here would be the issue that the NCAA might have with like going to bat for Wisconsin on this. Obviously, Wisconsin's angry. The Big Ten also released a statement here. They say the Big Ten Conference stands in full support of the University of Wisconsin regarding the contractual agreement between student athlete Xavier Lucas and the Wisconsin football program. As student athletes become active participants in revenue sharing, it is critical that agreed to obligations be respected, honored, and enforced. In light of current laws and association rules, information suggesting tampering and contract interference in this case by the University of Miami is very troubling. These actions undermine the efforts of its own conference as the ACC continues collaboration with the other A4 conferences in developing a sustainable framework for college sports. The situation is the latest example of the critical need for substantive governance reform. So it sounds to me like the Big Ten is pleading more towards Congress and lawmakers to help them out here. Because here's where this could kind of undermine the NCAA. And you heard even Wisconsin, the Big Ten used the term student athletes to describe the situation. What they're asking of their student athletes to make these 2-year non-compete commitments with these allegedly binding contracts, that sounds a lot like employees. That sounds a lot like the NCAA doesn't want, because the NCAA has gone so far to make sure they do not define student athletes, despite all the revenue they generate and all the TV ratings and the money and the merchandise. They desperately do not want to define these players as employees, right? Call them whatever you want to, students, independent contractors. They do not want to define them as employees. I think if this matter is, taken to the courts, and if you guys haven't been paying attention, the NCAA has been losing antitrust lawsuits left and right. Basically, the NCAA has been sued into irrelevance. They have no teeth. They have no power because the courts have almost completely neutered them. So if you're going to talk about litigating this matter, if you really want these 2-year, what essentially right now in 3 months, they would have a little more power if the House settlement passes. And by the way, this might hurt the House settlement passing because the House settlement defines athletes not as employees. This could undermine that effort when you talk. So if anything, I think the result of this could be these 2-year non-compete agreements that the Big Ten is asking their student athletes to define. These might just now get obliterated and no longer be able to be taken into effect because, this whole employee versus student athlete versus independent contractor thing, this all has been an absolute nightmare for the NCAA. So, and then, what else Wisconsin left out of the statement? And we're going to hear more about Xavier Lucas's side of it because we are planning on talking to his lawyer this week. That may happen as soon as tomorrow. We are expected sometime this week to talk with Darren Heitner and get his side and Xavier Lucas's side of the story, which I think is important here to tell because Wisconsin just got a big platform to tell their side of the story. I mean, of course, they make no mention about, they make it all sound like Miami is the big bad wolf and they tempted Lucas to come down here, making no mention of the young man wanting to be closer to his family and having a father who, according to Lucas's lawyer, has a life-threatening illness down in South Florida. So, wanting to spend more time close to home. They make no mention of that. Something that was a concern that was raised to me by a Wisconsin fan, a couple of them this week was, well, Donno, here's the big problem with the Lucas transfer and how he was able to get down to Miami without actually entering the transfer portal. And the transfer portal has two very defined windows, right? You can enter for a certain period of time in December into January, and you can enter a certain period of time in April. And Xavier Lucas found a way to transfer schools without being in the transfer portal. And so the concern that was brought to me was, well, hold on. This sets a precedent now where next season you're going to start to see a player, in September or October decide he wants to transfer schools, and he's going to play, for Florida State on one Saturday, and then he's playing for Miami the following Saturday, something like that. I don't think this sets that precedent at all. I'm not saying a precedent hasn't been set, right? I mean, somebody just found a loophole of how to transfer schools without hitting the portal. There's definitely a precedent there, but this idea that now you're going to see a guy play for one team in week 4 of the college season and then play for a different team in week 5, that was not said at all. You're completely ignoring the details of what Xavier Lucas just did. So his move happened between semesters, fall semester and spring semester. And in order for him to make this happen, he needed to meet the academic enrollment deadlines. He needed to de-enroll or unenroll from Wisconsin by a certain drop dead date. And he needed to successfully enroll at Miami by a certain date between semesters. So that's the precedent that was set here. And maybe we'll see more of this going forward. If a player, for whatever reason, doesn't or can't get into the transfer portal, if they're able to manipulate the academic deadlines. But I mean, having to do this in a way, because you guys still, universities, matriculation, enrollment is still part of this process. Lucas didn't transfer in the middle of a semester. He transferred between semesters. So if anything, that was the precedent that may have been set here. I don't think this opened up the door for a guy, playing for one team in October and playing for a different school in November. I don't think that's what happened here at all. We're yet to kind of determine and discover what's going to come out of this. The Wisconsin statement, the Big Ten statement, are they left it open that they may think about legal action. I feel like if Wisconsin was really ready to take Miami to court or take Xavier Lucas to court, that they wouldn't have made that statement, that they would probably be working in silence. I think the statement was kind of their way of pulling the narrative back, pleasing their fans, trying to lobby towards Congress, maybe to make some more favorable laws and regulations for how they'd like their process to go. I think that was what they were hoping to accomplish by this statement. I feel that if Wisconsin, my opinion, of course, I feel that if Wisconsin was ready to sue people left and right, they wouldn't be doing it with that statement. They would be doing it quietly behind the scenes. That's my expectation. And if the NCAA wants to try to do something, wants to try to slap Miami in the wrist, I guess it's their freedom to try to do that. But then with the whole idea of independent contractors versus employees, I don't know if they want to set any tough precedents in that mess either. Okay. So yeah, we appreciate everybody tuning in and making Locked On Canes your first listen and your first watch today. And I'll tell you, once we start getting access to spring practices coming up in March, we're all going to be looking for Xavier Lucas, and I look forward to seeing how he's going to fit in on the University of Miami, because they definitely needed another cornerback, another defensive back, and they got one of the best ones out there. Blazing speed, 6'2", 198 pounds. Hopefully he's able to put all of this behind and enjoy the rest of his collegiate career at the University of Miami. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button, subscribe to Locked On Canes on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your pods. And yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk about Junior Day and Miami's recruiting weekend and the big 7-on-7 event that we had down in South Florida. We're going to be talking about that on Monday with Brian Smith, our recruiting overlord. And then some point either later on Monday or on Tuesday, we hope to be tracking down Darren Heitner, Xavier Lucas's lawyer. So we'll talk to you next time on another episode of Locked On Canes, part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.